at least in part, that's why home prices did not see as big of a decline. And so home equity has been able to bounce back more quickly, but then you still have this really long tail of deferred foreclosure
Right.
activity that's kind of being trickled out as opposed to having the band-aid ripped off. I apologize for the mixed metaphor there, but
No, no, no. You and I have
that's what
been
we see.
talking about that topic for 5 years. This whole market is a story of deferral, and it only seems to, honestly, at this point, it only seems to have fallen through on a select number of states and a select number of cities. I mean, as a whole, the plan of maintaining a low interest rate, deferring all the REOs out to third parties, and not letting those come back onto the market, it's really only affected a select number of markets. By and large, it's increased the value of homes and really kept the market from crashing completely.
Yeah, I think I would have doubted this 5 years ago
You did
if I
doubt
had
it
said
5
it,
years
but
ago.
yes. But the extend and pretend strategy, you could say, uh, worked. I think in that respect, and another big thing that I still think I would love more clarity on. Our data, unfortunately, doesn't speak to it as much as I'd like. Is the deferral in the form of non-performing loans being sold
To third parties.
to third
I
parties.
agree with you. I think the problem that Lawrence is having over at NAR, the your data sources, as well as my studies, and I guess that's what I'd call it, or fascination, I think would be correct at this point. Uh, we're not looking, if we're having a supply and demand issue, and that's really what's happening with home appreciation. It's strictly supply and demand. Uh, I would like to know how many did the REO market really account for that much of the lost data? How much of that is adjusted data? How much is really coming back to the market? How much is really being sold to equity firms? And I don't, do you ever think we're going to get the real answer to that?
Probably not. I think one thing that was somewhat overlooked is we did see a surge in REOs last year.
Yes.
Now that's calmed down a bit, but we definitely saw about a 12-month surge in REO activity, and that didn't make a lot of sense. And I do think that was partially kind of the first wave of those non-performing loans kind of coming through and being foreclosed on by the new firms that own them. Because if you look at a lot of the names in our data behind those REOs, you're going to see names like Lone LSF, which is Lone Star, the Lone Star Fund,
Right.
which bought up a lot of those, and some other names that are not the big banks who are foreclosing. So I think it's very possible we could see some other waves like that come through of REOs. And again, it's a long tail type of situation as opposed to um, a tsunami all at once.
I agree. And based on what I can tell so far, and I'm sure you get this question, I get this question as a former banker, which is, well, how do I get a hold of REOs? And I would, and I'm wondering from your perspective, it's nearly impossible to consistently predict getting your hands on REOs. From my perspective, it looks like a big boy game being played on Wall Street with equity firms. Is that how you see it?
Yes, for the most part, I think the agents who are in already are still sitting pretty. I mean, especially in places like the Northeast,
Right.
with in terms of from the perspective of that you want REOs to list, but for the most part, it is yeah, the players have already been decided in large part on the REOs. I would pretty much agree with that. And you just don't see the volume there. The volume is coming through in smaller batches when it does hit REO. But certainly, I think it's never gonna completely go away for sure, and there's gonna continue to be an elevated level of REO. When we look at foreclosure starts in our July numbers, properties starting the foreclosure
Mm-hmm.
process, those nationwide are at an 11-year low.
Right.
but REOs are still, even though they're coming down, they're still elevated.
Right.
It's kind of like a low grade fever type of situation with REOs. It could continue to last for the next couple of years, but it's tough
The
to break into that.
strategy is held up. I mean, as long as they don't change the interest rate or have a sudden flood of properties hit the market, or God forbid somebody crazy does. I had hypothesized this with on a couple of calls, which is if they bring back lower lending standards, like no docs and low docs and alt and subprime, uh, they are lighting the match to a fuse that I don't think that they can handle. But if they keep it exactly as it is, or even bring the interest rate up a half or even a full point up, they could freeze it in time almost, couldn't they? I mean, I don't know enough about the economy in general on that level. I mean, I can only look at it from a banking perspective or a realtor perspective. But it would seem to me that if you brought the interest rate up, just the threat of it alone would kind of freeze the market where it is, and that seems to be a fairly healthy thing.
Yes, I think that this market is pretty interest rate sensitive. Um, so bringing the interest rate up would have a chilling effect on the market,
And it
which
gives the builders a
isn't.
chance to catch up. Certainly, I at some
Yeah,
point
it's
they've
not
got to figure
necessarily a
that out.
bad thing
Yeah,
to do that.
I think they have to figure that out at some point. However, I'm going to segue into two other articles. One on Market Watch. Daren has been all over the place. And by the way, if you want to, let me do a plug gratuitously for RealtyTrac here. If you want to see RealtyTrac in action and their data, go to my website, honish.com, click on the link that says Monster. Watch the first 15 minutes. You will watch me using the Mega system and pulling up numbers, and I cannot stress it enough. Just sign up, go to mega.realtytrack.com. It's free. Do searches, look at the numbers. Boy, it's a lot of listings that you guys should really consider. We were just talking about this before we started. I still think that most realtors and investors are just gun shy when it comes to the world of default. I think you're missing out on based on the number of foreclosures, there are a lot of listings that should have happened. That would be my answer.
Yes, I think that's true. And even though pre-foreclosure, or what we call foreclosure starts at an 11-year low,
It's a
they're
lot.
still there.
It's a
And
half a
there's
million. It's a
yeah,
crazy number in the U.S.
I mean
Um,
it was 36,000 in July alone. That's an 11-year low, but it's not a market.
it's
It's
still
definitely
3.5%
healthy.
of the market or something insane like that.
Yeah. And if you're complaining about inventory, I just want to make 2 points on that. You're complaining about inventory and not having enough inventory to list. That that's kind of to me a no-brainer to go after those folks
Have
who
to sell.
really need to list.
Yeah,
Yeah. And the other point is, if you don't like short sales, it's really not
you
all
don't have
about
to
short
worry.
sales anymore.
Right.
Most of these, actually the majority of these people now, and this is not the way it was a few years ago, these people who are falling into pre-foreclosure have equity in their homes, so they're not having to resort to a short sale.
Yeah, I think since we've worked together and talked about your data, I think it was 100% underwater to 90 to 80. I think it's 30% or maybe underwater in some of these markets. It's like 20 to 30%. It's almost a non-existent number. But it has been phenomenal to watch it, and the manipulation of the market. Manipulation's the wrong word, but it's certainly a very surgical repair job to keep this market afloat. I don't know if that's attributed to the president or to the Fed or to Fannie or Freddie or whomever. Um, I started in '88, and I've watched where you just bottom out and you see what the bottom looks like. Somebody big comes in and buys up all the REOs. They disperse those back on the market, and you start the cycle again. This time around, it was kind of the same, but they didn't ever allow there. I think I've had this question with you before. We never really saw a bottom, did we?
Not a true bottom. The 2010, we saw foreclosures drop off a cliff at the end of 2010 for what I would call artificial reasons,
Right.
uh, intervention on the part of the government, and uh, they never. And then we saw a pick back up in 2012, but yeah, it never really. fell completely off the cliff. There was a safety net there that in terms of foreclosures fell off the cliff, but the market really never fell off a cliff, which which the foreclosure trend is indicative of. And I do think it was because of strong government
I do
intervention,
too. I do too.
for
I
sure.
It might be that loan mods might be the single greatest government incentive to a bank ever created for salvaging a market. I don't know who the original author of the concepts were by giving some kind of subsidy back to getting the banks to doing the loan modification, but it certainly allowed a spreader theory, or the extended theory that we've been talking about. It did it. It worked. There's no
Yeah.
reason to.
Now, of course, philosophically, the question that people will bring up, and I think it's a valid question, is that create a moral hazard for the market to
Yes.
repeat its mistakes
Yes.
more quickly
Yes.
next time around? But the market's gonna go in cycles anyway. That this is kind of tinkering with the cycles basically.
Which
And,
brings us to the closing segments of our interview in the final 15 minutes, because I knew we were working towards this, which is you. Well, let's talk about the numbers first. We're still about a percent to 1.5% above what is deemed. You did an article back at the end of May of what a normal foreclosure count looks like as compared to what doesn't, and that there were over 6 million foreclosures done over the last decade. I mean, that's a staggering number. That's a ridiculous number.
Mhm.
Yet those properties didn't seem to find their way back to the market, and we're seeing the effects of that today. I know that a lot of people, thanks to the Academy Award performances, people got to watch the Big Short, right? So people
Yeah.
got kind of hipped up to how the game was played, more or less, and the book's far better, but that's always the discussion. But they're right. We're
Yeah.
still a point and a half, we're a percentage and a half above what's deemed normal by foreclosures at default standards, right? We're still in that 3 to 4% range of people that are defaulting on their mortgages on a daily basis. I mean, the numbers are still pretty up there by normal standards, correct?
Well, no, not
No.
quite. I mean, I would say foreclosure starts are back to normal standards, and
Okay.
in fact below.
The
However,
people in default.
the people in
Okay.
default and this kind of the deferred distress we've been talking about, people who've already gotten into trouble but have not been foreclosed on, that continues to be elevated. It's definitely nowhere close where it was at the peak of the crisis, but we're seeing um, that REO, well, the REO inventory, but also then the in default inventory. It's still at about 800,000 properties. Excuse me, that's including REO, but so it's about 500,000, as you said earlier, that are in foreclosure. Um,
480,000 the last time I went through your system. I love your
yeah,
system. 480,000.
yeah, some of these numbers better than I do, but yeah, it's not completely gone away. It's this low grade fever type of situation with those, and the everybody was worried about the shadow inventory.
Yep.
You would think, well, you have 7 million homes
They got to be somewhere.
added to the mix. What's going to happen with those? But we really did not see that impact the market as some had predicted in a largely negative way. In fact, many people saw this as a buying opportunity and snatched up those properties very quickly, and have done very well by doing that. But then what you haven't seen is builders ramping up to to re, to increase inventory of overall housing stock by in a way that matches the population growth we've seen in the country. So those fundamentals have created this supply and demand balance that's much more weighted in favor of demand being stronger than supply, and then that's helping to push up home prices. And the properties that are still winding their way through the foreclosure process are, for the most part, pretty easy to sell.
one of the weird facts with your particular system, and maybe you can answer this, and maybe there's a simple answer to it. But when I was looking at, say, bank owned for the United States,